What could be one of the last cohorts of the Peoria Corps program graduated today. That program is likely to end after President Donald Trump and the Department of Government Efficiency made several cuts to Americorps. Peoria Corps is a direct grantee of Americorps through the organization Serve Illinois, and it gives young adults the opportunity to get hands-on training in green careers while helping them build skills and confidence to enter the workforce. Over the course of the program, the 5 graduates earned their OSHA 10 and CPR first aid certifications. They also underwent forklift safety training and served a combined 4,500 hours.
I'm super proud. I think they've accomplished a lot with me being new in December, coming in kind of after they started. They were very welcoming, very accommodating, very much willing to help me understand what they were doing on a daily basis so then I could better advocate for them.
These opportunities could be short-lived if those federal cuts are made to the Americorps program, which would also leave additional responsibilities for the Public Works Department. The state of Illinois joined others in filing a lawsuit earlier this week challenging the Trump administration's decision to cancel Americorps grants and reduce its workload.